Tov, everyone, and welcome. It is Monday night. It is 8 p.m. here on the east side of the United States, here in the diaspora. This is the House of Seven Beggars, therefore it must be Zeyde Story Corner. That's right, Zeyde Story Corner. We started a new book. Yes, we started a new book. We finished the book that we were reading, and we are now starting on a new book, which we have just got from Yivel. Yes, wonderful book on Yiddish folk tales from the library of Yivel, and there are literally hundreds of stories in here. It's about 6,000 pages. Yes, it is. It is about probably close to 6,000 pages. So we have plenty of stories here to keep us busy for quite a while. Let's check and see what we got in the chat room. We have Shlomo, Susan, Mike, Joe, uh, and that's about it for right now. And a few are watching in the background. Yeah, of course, there's always a few watching in the background who, for some reason, are a little reticent to come into the chat room. It's a good group of people in the chat room. They don't bite very hard anyway. So yeah, so the stories we're going to tell are collections of Yiddish folk tales that have been translated into English. They have been gleaned or gathered for many years by this organization, Evo, who is their mission is to save a lot of Yiddish books and stuff like that and stories to preserve our heritage, and they do an amazing job. Not just books, films, and recordings, and so on and so forth. And it's a real mitzvah. Yes, it is. It really is a mitzvah. So we were looking for new stories, and we happened to run across the Yivo Library, and they had a very, very large collection of stories. So we are going to read it. Some of them are very short. Some of them are a little bit longer. But they're all good. Yes, they are all good. So rather than just sit here and talk about it, why don't we get started? So it's okay with you? It's okay with me? Okay. Well, let us get you on your camera then. If I can get there. There we go. And there I am. Okay, now we are all set to go here. Okay. So this first story is called Naked Truth and Resplendent Parable. Okay, so here we go. There's no author on this. As with many of the stories in this book, there are no authors because we don't know who wrote them. But we're going to tell them anyway. They are good stories. Okay, here we go. The great scholar known as the Vilna Gaon, or as we call it, the Gaon of Vilna. That's true, yes. But that's the way it's written in the book. Yes, it is. So, the Vilna Gaon once asked the preacher of Dubno, help me to understand. What makes a parable so influential? If I recite Torah, there is a small audience, but let me tell a parable, and the synagogue is full. Why is that? The Dubno Ragid replied, I'll explain it to you by means of a parable. Oh, it's a big surprise there. Well, let's just stick with the story here. Okay, here we go. Once upon a time, I don't know what that was. And there it goes again. Okay. Usually that's something gets plugged in or unplugged, and it looks like we have frozen. The camera has frozen somehow. Let's see if we can switch cameras. There we go. We have switched cameras. For some reason, it froze up. Let's try it again. So this is not going to be an issue tonight. There we go. So, okay. So let me start back there. Okay, so once upon a time, Truth went about the streets as naked as the day he was born. As a result, no one would let him into their homes. Whenever people caught sight of him, they turned away and fled. One day, when Truth was sadly wandering about, he came upon Parable. Now, Parable was dressed in splendid clothes of beautiful colors. And Parable, seeing Truth, said, "Tell me, neighbor, what makes you look so sad?" Truth replied bitterly, "Ah, brother, things are bad, very bad. I'm old, very old, and no one wants to acknowledge me. No one wants anything to do with me." What a shame, huh? Hearing that, Parable said, "People don't run away from you because you're old. Okay, I can see this is going to be a problem. I really have no idea what is going on here with this. The camera just keeps hooking and unhooking itself. So let's see if we can fix this here. Okay. Now we're unplugged. Let's try and plug it into a different USB port. Maybe, just maybe, that will help. Move that up just a little bit so I can hear it if it should happen to do it again. Okay, so let's give it a try again. Okay, so we try again. Okay. So let us back up. Hearing that Parable said, "People don't run away from you because you're old. I too am old, very old. But the older I get, the better people like me. I'll tell you a secret. Everyone likes things to be disguised and prettied up a bit. Let me lend you some splendid clothes like mine, and you will see that the very people who pushed you aside will invite you into their homes and be glad of your company." Truth took Parable's advice and put on the borrowed clothes. And from that time on, Truth and Parable have gone hand in hand together, and everyone loves them. They make a happy pair. So I told you they weren't so long. In fact, the next one I think is pretty short, actually. Okay. So, this next story, this is a good one too. This one is called "A Bit of Herring, a Pinch of Salt, and a Morsel of Bread." And we begin. The Dubner Magid once heard a scholar get up on the bima, the platform in the synagogue, and deliver a learned discourse citing biblical verses, Talmudic and rabbinic commentaries, and who knows what else. In the course of his talk, he managed to heap scorn upon the folk preacher who was spoken before him. It's a very rude thing to do, don't you think? When the learned man was done, the Dubner Bagid said to him, "Let me tell you a parable that may prove useful. In a certain town there once lived a great merchant, a very clever man, a very, very clever man. He observed that there were many rich and powerful people in his town. So he opened a jewelry store and had many customers. But some while later, he moved to a small town whose inhabitants, sad to say, were poor and threadbare. Seeing that, the clever merchant opened a store. No, not a store, a little shop, a Steibele, in which he sold herring, salt, kerosene, and other ordinary things. And with the same hands that had once handled diamonds, he now served up herrings and kerosene. And just as the merchant had been satisfied with the jewelry store, so now he was pleased with his poor little shop. No, he was actually more pleased with it. Everything he did delighted him. Things went on like this until one day a friend from a larger town came to visit him and said, "I don't understand. How is it fitting for a man who once sold diamonds and gems to be selling herring and salt and other such stuff?" The good and clever merchant replied, "I'm sorry to say that you don't get the point. Let me tell you something. The people who live in the large city are rich. They own many jewels, and they are great connoisseurs of jewelry. But in this small town, the people are poor. They work with their hands and struggle to make ends meet. They don't need diamonds, nor do they understand them. Indeed, what they need, yes, they need a bit of herring, a pinch of salt, and a morsel of bread." He's so very smart, huh? Okay. I told you they are very short stories. Okay, this one is called "Things Can Always Get Worse," and boy, don't we know that, huh? Okay. Once there was a poor man who thought it was too bad that he had to go about begging for bread, and he complained about it to God. With that, a hump grew on his back. And in addition to the hump, a man grew there too. And the man had a mouth as well. And each time the beggar tried to eat a morsel of bread, the man on his back snatched it from him. Then the beggar prayed, "Neither erase, O Lord, nor write, Let things be the way they were. And this is why one must never say that things are bad, because they can always get worse. It's a cute story, huh? Okay. This one is called The Luck That Snored. Once upon a time, there were two brothers, one rich and one other poor. The poor brother was the servant of his rich brother's house. One day he was standing guard at the gate. There came a tiny man wearing a golden cap and carrying a sack of gold on his shoulders. "Who are you?" the poor brother asked. "I'm your brother's luck." The poor brother was amazed. "Perhaps you can tell me where I can find my luck," he said. "Of course I can, but it won't do you any good," said the tiny man, "because he's lying in a deserted field that's hard to find. And your luck is mangy and run down and asleep." "Well, I think it must be my luck too." "Well, let's stick with the story for now. We'll worry about your luck later." But the poor brother begged and pleaded and wept until finally the man took pity on him. "All right, I'll tell you," he said. "Go off that way for a long, long time till you come to a field. Go past it for a long time till you come to another field, where you'll see thousands of lucks lying asleep. Don't wake them. Go on until you see thousands of other lucks who have just woken up. They will be sitting around, yawning and scratching themselves. But don't let that bother you, because people do that when they wake up, eh? Keep going, keep searching, until you find a luck who's sleeping sounder than the others and snoring louder." Sounds like you. Don't worry about my snoring. It doesn't seem to bother you. Yeah, but your wife complains. Well, can we skip back to the story here? Okay, we get back to the story. It's just a divertissement. Yeah, I know, a little diversion. Okay, let's get back to the story. Okay, so the luck is snoring louder. That one is your luck. And when the little man with the gold cap had finished speaking, he disappeared. So early the next morning, the poor brother started off in search of his luck. He walked on and on until he came to a barren field, just as the little man had said. He didn't stop, but went on until he came to another field that was equally barren. He looked about and saw a great many lucks sleeping and snoring. Just do the story. But he did not disturb them. He saw others who sat around yawning and scratching themselves, but he paid no attention. He went on and on, searching and searching until he saw a luck that was sleeping more deeply than the others. He went up and tried to wake him, Luck, my luck, wake up! Why do you sleep so hard? His luck never stirred, just slept and snored. Again he tried to wake him, but nothing happened. Finally the poor man wept. Luck, oh my luck, get up! You slept long enough. You've slept enough. Then, slowly, his luck opened his eyes and yawned. This makes me tired just reading this. The poor man was delighted. Luck, ah, my luck, he pleaded. Don't sleep anymore. Pay attention. My wife and children are hungry. Help me. Give me something. His luck had nothing, but he put a scabby hand into his breast pocket and took out a silver gulden and handed it to the poor man. What good will this do? The man asked. Some good, grumbled his luck. Go to the marketplace and buy the first thing that comes your way. The poor man went to the marketplace, where he met a peasant with a hen to sell. So he bought the hen and took it home. He went to sleep, and the hen flew up to a shelf and went to sleep too. When the poor man woke in the morning, he saw something gleaming on the shelf. He got out of his bed and found that the hen had laid a golden egg. He woke his wife and children and showed them the golden egg, and they danced and leapt for joy. Then the poor man took the egg and sold it for a great deal of money. And from that time on, he grew richer and richer. Now, this is a very interesting story. I like this one a whole lot. This one is called The Fever and the Flea. Okay. Once upon a time, all the time, always once upon a time. Why wasn't it just a few years back, or maybe yesterday, or maybe it's going to happen tomorrow? No. It's always once upon a time. But that's the way these stories go. So, once upon a time, a fever and a flea, meeting each other on the road, got into an argument. You're nobody, the flea said to the fever. Why, you're so unimportant that you are invisible. The poor fever, hearing this, was terribly upset. It was more than he could bear to be talked to like this by a flea. You, he said angrily, what makes you think you're anybody? Just because you can be seen, just because you can leap about, that doesn't make you better than me. Yes, it does, declared the flea. I lead a better life than you. I wouldn't trade mine for yours for anything. The fever, red with rage, said, You lead a better life? You? Ha! Invisible though I am, I wouldn't trade places with you in a million years. The quarrel grew more and more heated until it seemed that the two were about to leap at each other and scratch each other's eyes out. But finally the fever calmed down and said, "What's the point of arguing like this? Why don't we try an experiment to prove beyond question which of us leads a better life?" "All right," said the flea. "I'm willing. What did you have in mind?" Said the fever, "Each of us will go off and find a victim to infest for 3 days. At the end of that time, we'll meet and compare results. Then we'll be able to decide which of us has the better life." "Very well," said the flea, and they shook hands and went their ways. 3 days later they met again. The fever, seeing the flea, said, "What's the matter? You look unhappy." "Ah," said the flea, "I've had a hard time, a very hard time." "What happened?" Heaving a deep sigh, just like that, see? That's a heavy sigh. Would you like to see it again? Okay. Heaving a deep sigh, the flea said, "After we parted, I made my way inside a palace. Ah, it was wonderful there, a veritable paradise. I spent the night in a bed that would have pleased the most demanding public official. What a bed! I wish I could describe it to you. But it's impossible. After all, I'm a flea, not a poet." It's like Dr. McCoy, huh? "Jim, I'm a doctor. I'm not a poet." Okay, anyway. At midnight, just as I was sleeping most sweetly, I felt someone getting into bed with me. Ah! Whoever it was gave off a terrible smell of brandy. I tried to ignore it, but he started tossing and turning in the bed, so I couldn't get back to sleep. Well, I thought, if that's what you're up to, let me show you a trick or two. Well, you know me. I'm a flea. I went after him, tooth and nail. In no time, I gave him a good reason to toss and turn. He was thrashing so hard I had to laugh. All at once he uttered a roar that brought everyone in the palace running. "A flea!" someone cried. And then every last one of them went after me. They hunted me up and down, forward and backward. It was all I could do to escape with my life. And now, I've spent the last 3 days just wandering, hungry and restless. Can't seem to settle down. "So sad," said the fever. "You've really had a hard time." "Yeah," groaned the flea. "But what about you? How did you make out?" The fever stuck out his stomach like a gentleman and said expensively, "Ah, me! I told you I lead a good life. No sooner had I left you than I met a peasant and jumped right into him. Feeling my presence, he ran off to his house and cried to his wife, "Woman, I think I have a fever. Get my bed ready." Well, I looked around. It was plain to see that I was in a poor man's house, but no matter. Once the peasant was in bed, I began to do my business. The man's wife brought him a large bowl of hot soup and some black bread. So I fed nicely on that. Then, to warm us up, she covered us with some pelts and old coats. Well, you can imagine how my peasant tossed and turned. Whenever I got a little bored, I would stroll about inside him. Seeing how feverish he was, his wife kept putting good things into his mouth, and of course, I got my share. Ooh, it was tasty. If I hadn't finally taken pity on him, and if I hadn't agreed to meet you in 3 days, I'd still be there. Well, what do you think? Said the fever. Which of us leads a better life? You do, the flea admitted, and slunk away. Okay, another story. Well, I think we are about halfway at our time. Let us take a break, and when we come back, we shall learn why dogs chase cats and cats chase mice. It might surprise you why. So, please stay tuned. We will be back in 6.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies, everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. The show starts in 5 minutes. The show starts in 4 minutes. starts in 3 minutes. The show starts in 2 minutes. The show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
And we are back, just as promised. Okay, so again, we are reading stories from the collected stories collected by Yivo. These are stories that are written by many different authors from all over the European continent. Some from Russia, some from Poland, some from the Ukraine, some from Germany, all over. So, they've done a wonderful job. So let us get back to find out, why do dogs chase cats and why do cats chase mice? Let's find out. Okay. Here we go with the once upon a time again. Okay, once upon a time, the dogs applied to the king for a decree that would forbid people to bother dogs. The king signed the decree and gave it to them, but then the dogs couldn't think of a place to put it. Finally, they passed it to the cats for safekeeping, because cats are able to creep into all sorts of snug nooks and crannies. So the cats took the paper and hid it in the eaves of a house. Sometime later, dog catchers started rounding up dogs. "Hey!" cried the dogs. "Wait a minute. We've got a decree from the king that says you can't bother us." "If that's true," said the dog catchers, "where is it?" So the dogs ran to the cats and said, "We need the king's decree that forbids anyone to bother us. Where is it?" "Wait a minute, we'll go look," said the cats. And off they went to the eaves. The document was there all right, but the mice had gnawed it to shreds and tatters. When the dogs heard this, they were furious and chased the cats. And when the cats were chased, they were furious and chased the mice. And that's how it has been ever since. So now you know. Next time somebody asks, why do dogs chase cats and cats chase mice, you will know. Okay, we go on to the next story. This one is called Wisdom or Luck. Wisdom, meeting Luck one day, got into an argument about which of them was more powerful. Wisdom said that nothing can be accomplished in the world without wisdom, whereas everything is possible with it. Luck, on the other hand, said, "What good is wisdom without luck? An ounce of luck is worth more than a pound of wisdom." But wisdom insisted that only wisdom is necessary to accomplish anything. As they stood quarreling, it happened somewhere in the world a boy was born. Wisdom and Luck agreed that one of them should enter into him, and then they would see what he could achieve. So, Wisdom entered into the boy, who was born to a very poor woman, who was unable to provide him with any sort of education. But when he was 14, or maybe it was 15, a goldsmith took pity on him and made him an apprentice. The boy was so clever that it was not long before he became more skillful than the goldsmith. Seeing that there was nothing more he could learn, the boy told his master that he wanted to leave to go to a large city. His master was sad to be losing such a good worker, but the boy was eager to make his way in the world. He traveled for a while until he came to the capital city, where the king lived. There he met the town's finest tailor, who sewed for the royal family. "Let me be your apprentice," said the boy, and the tailor agreed. Before long, his master saw with astonishment that the boy was a remarkable tailor. He was continually inventing such wonderful new designs that the king wondered why his new clothes were so much better than the ones he had before. "Who is making these clothes?" the king asked the tailor. "I am," replied the tailor. "I spend a lot of time thinking up new and more beautiful robes for you." The king, hearing this, rewarded the tailor richly. Now the king's only daughter was so brilliant that no one had ever been able to find her a husband as clever as she. I don't care what rank in life he was. If he can make me talk, I'll marry him. But let every man who wants to marry me take warning. If he's not clever enough, it's off with his head." Her father had no choice but to abide by her terms. Naturally, every eligible young man wanted to marry her, for in addition to brilliance and birth, she had extraordinary beauty. So first of her suitors were well-educated, important young men who thought themselves her equal. But one and all were unsuccessful. She listened to what they had to say and made no reply. The suitors, one and all, had their heads chopped off. Hearing about the princess, the tailor's apprentice decided that he would seek to win her hand. "I'll find a way to make her talk," he said. "Anyhow, what do I have to lose, sad and poor as I am?" He went to the king's palace and asked to be admitted. "I've come to talk with the princess," he said, "and get her to talk to me." He was led into the room where the princess sat, but he acted as if he had not seen her. Instead, he looked around the room and, catching sight of a candelabrum, addressed it. "Good morning, candelabrum. I have something to tell you, and I'd like your opinion about it when I'm done." With that, he launched into a tale. "Once upon a time, dear candelabrum, there were 3 men who lived in a village: a woodcarver, a tailor, and a teacher. But there was not enough work in the village, so they decided to take their tools and go out into the wide world and look for employment. They traveled on and on until they came to a forest, where night soon fell. Then they had to sleep where they were. But because they were afraid of wild animals, they agreed that each of them would stand guard for 2 hours. The first watch was taken by the woodcarver. It was not long before he looked about for something to while away the time. He examined a piece of wood lying around and found a fine log, which he carved into the form of a woman. He finished the statue just as his 2 hours were up, so he woke up the tailor and went to sleep. The tailor, like the woodworker, looked about for something to do. His eye fell on the statue of the naked woman. Oh my goodness. So he took his scissors and needles and several yards of cloth and sat down to sew a dress. When he was finished, he closed the statue in it. Just then, his 2 hours were up. So he woke the teacher and went to sleep. The teacher, too, looked about for something to do. Suddenly, he saw a lovely woman in a beautiful dress. But when he spoke to her, she remained silent. It seemed too bad that so splendid a woman should be unable to talk. So he sat down beside her and undertook to teach her to speak. And he was so skillful and patient that she began to speak. Meanwhile, I could make a really bad joke about this right now. Yeah, let's just forget about that for now. Let's just continue on with the story. Okay, we forget about it for now. I tell you later, though. Yeah, I can imagine what it is. Okay, let's just go on. Meanwhile, the dawn came, and his companions awoke and saw him in conversation with a beautiful, well-dressed woman. Each of them recognized his handiwork. He wanted her for himself. So, of course, all three men quarreled. The woodcarver said, I carved her out of wood, so she belongs to me. The tailor said, What? She would be nothing but a naked piece of wood when I found her. I clothed her, so she belongs to me. The teacher said, What good is beautifully clothed dummy? I taught her to speak, so she belongs to me. And they went around and around. Now, dear candelabrum, what do you think? To whom does she belong? The princess, who had naturally listened to the whole story and admired the boy's cleverness, spoke up. Of course, she belongs to the man who made her talk. The youth, however, was cleverer than he was lucky. Servants had been posted in the room to report whether the boy made the princess talk, and they simply didn't hear her when she spoke. So they concluded that the boy had failed like all the others. Nor were they surprised, since he was, after all, so poor. And without delay, they led him off to the executioner. Just as the sword was raised to behead the boy, Luck turned to Wisdom and said, Well, see what you've accomplished with your wisdom? You did your best, but when it comes right down to it, without me, you can do nothing. So let's trade places. In a few minutes, I'll get more done than you've accomplished in the boy's whole lifetime. No sooner had Luck entered into him that the princess chanced to walk out onto her balcony. Seeing that the clever boy was being led to execution, she halted the procession and sent word to the king. This, she informed him, was the young man who had provoked a reply from her, and this was the one she would marry. The king commanded that the servants who had been about to behead the youth should themselves be executed. And the princess married the tailor's apprentice, and they lived happily ever after. And that was how Luck proved that he was stronger than wisdom. Okay. We do one more story for tonight, and then we call it good, eh? Okay. This one is called Pleasing All the World. An old man and his 10-year-old son were leading a camel through the desert. Their way was long. The sun was hot, and they were tired. They met a man who looked at them amazed. "How foolish that you both go on foot," he said, "when the camel was created to carry people." Heeding the stranger's words, the old man mounted the camel and his son followed on foot. A while later, they met a second traveler who said, "Have you no pity on your son? He's still a child with tender feet. Look at them, cut to ribbons. How can a father allow his own child to suffer like that?" And the father, ashamed, dismounted and set his son upon the camel. But a while later, they met a third traveler who cried, "For shame!" And in the heat of the day, too, the child has no right to ride while his old father walks. So the old man hit on another idea. He and his son both mounted the camel, making themselves comfortable while the camel went on. But then they met a fourth traveler who threw up his hands in horror, abusing a dumb creature, making him carry a double load. Have you no pity in your hearts? The father and son quickly dismounted. The father said, "Well, there's no help for it. We'll just have to carry the camel ourselves. Though someone will probably come along and say that it's stupid, no matter what we do, we can't please all the world." Now that is a good story to remember. You can't please all the world. Okay. So, that is where we are going to stop for this evening. And we will pick up with these many, many, many stories next week. Hopefully the camera is not going to act up. I think we're not going to plug it into that one anymore. Okay. I want to thank everybody for being in here today. And don't forget, on Wednesday is the Torah study with Rabbi A and Reb Reuven. And Friday night is Kabbalat and Ma'ariv LeShabbat. And Shabbat morning at 10 a.m. is Shachrit and Musaf. Until then, my dear friends, I say, Leila Tov.